actually heard the CEO of a company say this: we are a business of millennials. When looking at technology solutions, we immediately cross off anything that has to be installed. Great. Really makes you wonder what the future holds for IT pros, but I want you to have a guess about what industry this company was in. Sounds like Silicon Valley startups, doesn't it? Go millennials. In fact, this company was a group of accountants, one of the most traditional risk-averse industries you will find out there. But this is the new workforce. These are your competitors, and they are ringing the bell loud and clear to tell you that SaaS is here. SaaS is awesome. Get used to it. Who's scared? Look, as a systems administrator in banking, government, and finance, putting that kind of stuff in the cloud scares the hell out of me. But there are some really good valid reasons why the business might be staring down the barrel of a software as a service project. This kind of thing is a good business driver when executive teams are looking for the ability at the click of a button to easily see the status of a whole bunch of projects across the organisation. That kind of stuff exists in SaaS solutions without you having to build it. And while Power BI can also be in-house and isn't one of the more traditional third-party vendor SaaS apps, for some reason executives prefer to look at pretty dashboards like this than they do looking at rows of data in Excel. Sorry, Excel, I still do love you, really. People want the flexibility to work from where they want to work. Work isn't a place we go anymore. It's a thing we do. And we want to be able to do it from the freedom of sitting down on the beach in Surfers Paradise without being tied to a corporate network and a desk in the office. Businesses also need to look outside of their own systems because that's where their customer interaction is. So the sentiment of your brand and the buying behaviours of the customers are happening outside of systems that you control in your corporate network. Budgets are changing, and they're not necessarily shrinking. What we're finding, and the latest Gartner survey proved, is the marketing departments are leading the charge for technology spend. In fact, as a percentage of revenue, the chief marketing officers are spending nearly as much on technology as the CIOs of the organisations. That's a big shift. In fact, the marketing department is spending more on technology than they are on media advertising, and nearly as much as they are on staff labour costs. Businesses are also after more cost transparency. It's much easier for them to figure out the cost of a system when that SaaS subscription gives them access to everything, instead of looking at an on-premises system where they have to try and add in how much of the infrastructure component is costed to the system, how much of the IT labour costs are costed to the system. They want more transparency about what technology is costing them. We're all used to jumping online now with a click and a credit card and getting access to new systems that we want to use on our personal devices. The business is starting to expect that in the office as well. And our lovely vendors want to make it as simple as possible to entice us with the big meal, with the bundling of the tasty, tasty cloud fries for free. The next time you go and renew your software licensing, just have a look and see how Microsoft and Amazon and a whole bunch of the big players now are putting in at very low cost, very enticing cloud software licensing to entice you to use their cloud products as well. Interesting enough, some of the SaaS adoption drivers are actually coming from the IT departments. SaaS is really good if you have a business capability that is going to be very short term, so that you don't have to go and invest in infrastructure and skills outside of your core capability and then not need them. It's also really good for bursting. So if you have a business plan or a marketing thing that's going on that's going to scale up really, really fast, a few tweaks of your cloud stuff and you've got more capacity than you ever needed. It's going to enable you to grow really quickly. SaaS can also offer better failure protection. So instead of you having to invest in extra infrastructure to give you better redundancy, the SaaS providers do that for you. You only have to look at the size and redundancy of those Azure data centers that were in the opening keynotes to see just how much players like Microsoft are investing in the redundancy capability of those kind of data centers. SaaS might also offer you some security or backup things that you don't have access to on premises. So there's some really great threat protection, cloud backups, all of that kind of stuff that you can do in the cloud now too. Less IT support. If the business wants to go down the rabbit hole of looking at a new system, you don't necessarily need to have to support it. And then, of course, there's less maintenance, less hands-on tin, less replacing the things that have broken, less upgrading the hardware. So there are all these different business drivers that are coming from the IT department. Less training. If the business wants to adopt a new system and you don't want to have to upskill your IT staff on how to support it, you don't need to send them off into a classroom for extra training. SaaS is awesome, right? Have I convinced you? Maybe some of you. What I want you to do is to grab out your phones or your laptops, your little handheld devices. I want you to browse to pollev.com/Scuffy and just do a very quick live poll for me. And in this poll, I want you to identify what you believe will be the top driver. Now, you're only allowed to pick one. Some of them are IT drivers, some of them are business drivers. Light up these bars for me and show me what you believe the next driver will be for your organization's next SaaS project. Here we go. Fantastic. I love it when live polls work. Wow, cost, really? I wonder if these results would be different if I had a group of business owners in the room. We have very IT-centric views when we look at these things, rightly so. Yeah, fantastic. All right. That's great. Thank you very much. Look, I know that you want to know how to control all this stuff safely, but it's really important to start with why, and it's really important to understand why this is even a thing. So if SaaS is so awesome, why do we view it as a threat? Because there is no cloud, it's just somebody else's computer. And we know that the business gets sold this magical cloud thing, and we know that it's just a bunch of servers sitting in somebody else's data center, right? Unfortunately, they're computers that we don't control. And SaaS is the hardest cloud capability for us to bring in to all of the controls that we have in place for our own on-premises environments, because we basically control nothing. As you move up the stack of what we control, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, we actually have a little bit of control over some of those things. With SaaS, we don't. One of the things we do control that isn't in that stack, because technically it's kind of doesn't fit on there properly, is access, identity and access. And I will talk about that a little bit later. But as far as pure IT ops infrastructure management goes, SaaS, nothing. Absolutely nothing. The truth is that if IT doesn't provide a business capability and provide it fast, the business will go out and get it. CIO Insights survey. Now, this is US, UK, Australian, and New Zealand enterprise workers, where 81% of workers and 83% of IT staff admitted to using non-approved SaaS applications within their organisation. I think the other 17% of the IT staff just weren't admitting it, right? That's a scary statistic. One of my favourite stories is about James Moore. He's a guy who's head of market risk for an Australian energy company. Now, James wanted to run some data analytics in the cloud. And the reason he wanted to do it in the cloud was because it was only a test project. It was, a small thing of data that he wanted to see if it was going to work. He didn't want to have to go through our processes of putting in the business case, getting all the changes approved, blah, da, 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 da. So James went out and provisioned this SaaS application on his corporate credit card. But wait, it gets better. The application that he wanted to use was actually blocked from the corporate network. So we went across the road and used the Wi-Fi at the local coffee shop to put his data up in the cloud. Not so exciting. Until he found a slightly better way to do it. He went down to Officeworks and bought a wireless dongle with a 4G card in it and took that back to his desk at work instead. Yeah, we don't like James so much. The funny thing is that this was spoken to from a stage at an industry conference about how the business is getting stuff done, how the business is using the cloud for better business results without IT getting in the way. Now, the energy company in question were very quick to point out that this was non-identifiable test data, as they should. But it's horror stories like this that keep us up at night. Horror stories like this too. This one's a great one. CIO magazine, and this is before Facebook at work. So we're talking public Facebook here. CIO magazine actually recommended to CIOs that if they wanted to have great conversations about digital transformation inside their organisations, they create a Facebook page and they invited staff to follow it so that they could all talk about their great work projects on Facebook. I laughed when I first read this and then went, hang on a minute, CIO magazine is something that these guys take seriously when they make these decisions. And horror stories like this. Horror stories always interest me. This one in particular was talking about conversations that were happening in the cloud in a chat room where the service had an open back door and they'd found out that their conversations and data had been stolen by hackers. This is the kind of stuff that nightmares are made of, but I just want you to think for a minute. We get to hear about the cloud horror stories because they're really public. And when they impact more than one organisation especially, we hear about them. If you have a problem in your own network, if there's a hacking attempt on your own on-premises environment, we're not so quick to go out to the media and tell everybody about it, right? So you've got to temper horror stories a wee bit. They happen in different environments, whether they're cloud or not. We have challenges as IT pros with SaaS. We put roadblocks in the way. And as much as the business can get frustrated, we don't do it because we like saying no. We do it for a reason. We do it because it's our job to protect the business and to protect their data, okay, whether they like to hear that or not. So I'm going to go through a few of the roadblocks that we put in the way with SaaS solutions and some questions that we can try and ask to get around them. Please read the terms and conditions, because I'm sure as heck going to tell you that the business owners aren't going to, okay? As the IT department, and maybe in consultation with a legal or risk team if your organisation's big enough to have one, I want you to read the fine print. This is the contract between you and the SaaS provider. This says what they can do with your data and what they are contractually obligated to provide you in terms of a service. It's your job to read through that stuff and spell it out in plain English to the business. If there are things in the terms and conditions that you are not happy with, that go against how you operate your own environments, make the business aware of them. At the end of the day, it's still their call. And they might be happy to overwrite that stuff. But you are covered if you've made sure that you know what's going on and you've had that conversation with the business in advance. I did an Australian university short course on cloud and risk management. They asked you to go out and ask your SaaS provider whether or not they would be open to an external audit. What's their e-discovery processes like? And do they have simple things in place like non-repudiation to prove the authenticity and the integrity of the data? I don't know if that's important in your particular organisation, but these are the kind of tough questions that you have every right to ask. Now, you might not get an answer. A lot of the SaaS providers don't really like giving away all their secrets because, competitors. Ask the question. At least you can tell the business that you asked. Compliance is an interesting one, and I know that it affects different organisations differently. So you might have industry-specific requirements for compliance. For example, the Australian Financial Services Licence, if you hold one of those, there are certain things that you can and can't do with data. There might be country-specific regulations that you have to be aware of. The Australian Privacy Act, Microsoft had some really good conversations before we had Azure data centres in country about the difference between data access and disclosure, and I'll talk about that too. So the Privacy Act is one that we've got to see whether or not there's any things in there that we need to be aware of. Are there any international compliance requirements that your organisation has? Do you do business or share data with offices that are part of your organisation that are outside of Australia? Now, the interesting thing about compliance and regulations is these things can change. And the Safe Harbour Act was actually challenged as perhaps being invalid. When that happens, it's the SaaS provider's responsibility to adapt their piece of software to the compliance regulations, and there is nothing you can do about that process. The scary part is that as part of an organisation in Australia, it's still your responsibility. You being in alignment with compliance regulations, you can't abdicate to somebody else just because you get a service from them, okay? Make sure that you have really good communication and support channels with your SaaS providers, and you're keeping an eye on this stuff. So if it changes, you can at least have those conversations with what impact that's having on your business and what the SaaS provider's plans are for keeping up with the compliance. The data stuff. Data access and disclosure. They're actually two very different terms. And the reason that I mention these is because, as I said, before Azure data centres were in Australia, the Office 365 services were compliant for the Australian privacy laws because even though the data was being stored on a server outside of Australia, nobody had access to it. Even the Microsoft engineers do not have access to see your emails and to see what's in your data. So even though it was stored offshore, there was no disclosure. We weren't opening it up to any third parties outside of the country to see. Check with your SaaS provider to see what the story is with who has access to your data. There are some very popular SaaS providers who like giving access to your data to advertisers. Microsoft doesn't do that, but ask the question. Microsoft also has a little thing in place that's kind of unique called Customer Logbox. If you haven't heard about it, it's available on the Office 365 E5 plans. And it's a great, secure way of temporarily giving access to a Microsoft engineer to see the data when you need them to see it for a troubleshooting problem. Now, as an IT pro, I know that I can look at all of the logs in the world, but sometimes I just need to see what's happening from the end user's perspective, and I need to see what's happening to the data. Okay, so customer lockbox is a really good way of you giving temporarily access to that software engineers to troubleshoot something and then having it revoked. Data sovereignty. Where in the world is your data living, and is it staying there? Do you have to keep stuff in country and sacrifice the benefits of geo-redundancy? Where's your data living? You know, now that servers are cattle and not pets, and we don't know what their names are or which paddock they're in, do you know where your data is? This one's being played out in the courts at the moment. And the Second Circuit Court has actually just upheld a ruling that Microsoft does not have to give the American FBI access to data that is on a server in Ireland. So the FBI issued a warrant, wanted some information as part of a court case, and some of that was on a server that was outside the US. Microsoft challenged it, said that's outside your jurisdiction. They won that case and it got appealed. So on appeal, that court ruling has just been upheld that Microsoft does not have to hand over data to the FBI because it's on a server outside of the US. Now, unfortunately, judges don't always interpret law the same. And Google, just recently, February the 5th, actually had a ruling against them to say that they did need to hand over data that was on a server outside of the States to an FBI warrant. We really hope this gets overturned. This is important, and the same rules should apply for everybody. So I don't see Google rolling over on this one. I'm pretty sure that they're going to appeal it, and we hope it goes their way. What's your exit strategy? Is that data going to live in the SaaS application forever? Well, as long as you keep paying the fees for it, I guess. So what happens if the new management comes in and they decide that they don't want that cost anymore? They don't like that vendor, they want to use something else. Or the business even decides that they don't need the project anymore and they want to turn off the service. What kind of data are you putting in there? What are the retention requirements for you keeping a hold of that data long term? And can you get it out? Okay, so investigate with your SaaS application whether or not you can export your data out and keep it. I know, for example, Xero, that provide online financial services and the cloud bookkeeping stuff, they will legally hold on to data for 7 years. That's an Australian requirement for a company that we hold our financial records for that long. But if I stop paying my Xero subscription, I don't get access to that data anymore from the day my subscription ends. That doesn't mean that they'll go and delete it, okay? They will hold on to that data, and if, heaven forbid, the ATO come knocking on my door and want to audit me, I can ring the nice people at Xero and go, can you get me access to that data from 3 years ago? And they'll do it for a price. They won't do it for free. But they'll negotiate with me an access fee. They'll pull it out of their archives and they'll make that data available to me. Xero's an interesting one in that I can actually get most of the data out of there, but I have to run 15 different manual exports and I get a whole bunch of CSV files. And there are a few third-party providers that have stepped in to help sort of automate that process, if you like. But that's just one example of data that you might put in a system that you might want to get out later or keep a copy of if you're cutting your ties to that service. What's going to need to talk to that data? Do you have any on-premises systems that are going to need to feed their data up into the cloud? Do you want to take some of this data that's into the cloud and feed it into an on-premises system? Okay. When we're looking at on-premises architecture, and I get bonus points for every time I say the word on-premises, all right? Hope you're counting. When we're looking at our own in-house systems, we've got great things like enterprise service buses that provide a lovely middleware layer between our applications and how we want our end users to see them. Data integration might be important, again, depending on what you're putting in the cloud. Do you have connectors between those systems and where the business wants to see it? What's the API access like? API, the cloud version of an enterprise systems bus. Can you access that information from another cloud system? It might be something that you want to do. Unfortunately, it's something that might be really easy for your users to do as well. So if they're using systems like Zapier, if this then that, Microsoft Flow, can they put connectors into the API for that SaaS application to suck the data out and put it somewhere else that you don't control? What's the API access like for your SaaS application? Now, I don't want to steal the thunder of a session that's running tomorrow morning, but there's a great product out now called Cloud App Security by Microsoft, and it can actually extend some controls into some of these other SaaS providers. So Box, G Suite, Salesforce, Dropbox, things like checking on login activities and file scanning and quarantining, that kind of stuff, Cloud App Security can actually reach out some controls from your systems into these other providers. That's pretty exciting, and that's a new capability. If you want more information on Cloud App Security, get along to Jeff Alexander's session with the other guys at 9:45 a.m. tomorrow. And if you can't make it to that session, CLD 332A if you want to catch it on the recordings later. They're going to do all the demo-y things. Cloud App Security really does rock for controlling SaaS applications in your organisation. In the old days, securing stuff used to be really easy because what we controlled was the devices. Corporate information lived on a system. And we put this great big firewall between us and the nasty old internet. And then we went and poked holes in it for all the ports that we wanted to allow through, right? But at the end of the day, corporate information was too big to email, too big to fit on a floppy drive. USB keys hadn't been invented. It was the good old days. My first USB key was 4 megabytes. I was so excited. Doesn't work like that anymore. When our data is in the cloud, our on-premises controls don't work for data that's already in the internet. So we need to look at cloud controls for cloud data. Azure Information Protection. If you haven't had a look at that, check out this product. I've thrown up a bit.ly link there, AZInfoP, for you to get more information on it. Azure Information Protection secures information at the source that then travels with that information no matter where it goes. So if you want to classify and protect documents, spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, if it's got sensitive material in it, it's worth looking at Azure Information Protection because all of those controls and classifications stay with that file, whether I email it to the outside world, whether I put it in Dropbox, heck, I could stick it on the public internet, and as long as it's secured with Azure Information Protection, that file is still secured once it's left your organization. Check out the settings of your SaaS application. Is there anything in there that you need to tweak? Don't assume that all the default settings are going to meet your requirements. So Slack, for example, by default, you can go in and edit a post that you had written already. So if we have an argument about something that was said on Slack, I can go in and edit what I posted, and you won't receive a notification that it's changed. If you do go back and decide to look at it again, you'll see this little grey edited thing, but you'll have no idea what the original message was or what edits I made. Now, that might not be a concern, but it might be. You can turn that off in Slack so that everything you post can't be edited. Might mean you need to put up with a few typos every now and again, but that gives you a really true and accurate record of what is being said. That's a great example of an application setting that you can go in and tweak. So check that out and just see what you need to change to get this application to be as secure as you need it to be. This is the easiest tip I am going to give you, and it'll be one of the best. I told you I loved Excel still, really. SaaS software does not have an installation footprint. What a surprise. We don't install anything on the PCs. So when I go and run an audit to find out what applications are being used in my organisation and who's using them, it's not going to tell me from the PCs. Your best friend will be some sort of software catalogue. If you have a better way to do software cataloguing in your organisation, feel free. But seriously, if you don't, run up an Excel spreadsheet. Vendor, application, URL to get into the back-end admin, how to access the support channels, all of the basics in one place so you know what you've got going on and what you need to manage. I do have a quick demo of Cloud App Security because I think that this is a really cool little feature. I'm terrible at live demos, so this one is recorded, but it means that I can talk to you about what's happening. So with Cloud App Security, it can actually look at your firewall logs because that's where our SaaS traffic goes, in and out of our firewalls up to the internet. And we can tell it to go and have a look for one of about 12,000 different SaaS applications to see who in our organisation is using what. I'm going to pick on accounting and finance, and we're going to go down and have a look at Xero. And just in this particular filter, it's going to tell me where they do their hosting. It's going to tell me if their transport is encrypted. And it's going to tell me what compliance regulations they meet, like ISO 27001. I have no idea what that is, but that might be important to your organisation. So as I said, there are approximately 12,000 different SaaS applications that Cloud App Security knows about. And as well as using that as a tool to find out what's happening in your organisation, it also gives you a wealth of information already about that organisation without you having to dig through their privacy pages and agreements. Cloud App Security, it's going to turn into a Cloud App Security session. There's a free trial. So it comes, again, on the Office 365 E5 plan. If you have an enterprise plan for Office 365, you can add a 30-day free trial of Cloud App Security right now. So you can go and have a bit of a play with it first. The infrastructure stuff. What's their SaaS infrastructure like? Is somebody keeping their server firmware up to date? Updating the BIOSes? Who's got access to their data centres? Do you know? Are you going to ask? Are they going to tell you? As I said, maybe, maybe not. And they'll make some information public and some information they won't. Microsoft will tell you that access to their data centres by Microsoft staff requires you to step on a set of scales when you enter and leave the building. Not because you have to meet any fitness requirements, but they check whether or not you are taking things in and not bringing them out, or whether or not you've brought something out that you didn't take back in again. So access requirements like that. How's their data security lifecycle? Is the data encrypted when it's stored, when it's in transit? Where do their backups go? Where are they archiving to? How are they archiving? What's the end of media lifecycle? What do they do when they replace the disks and their disks die? All those kind of things that we do in our own organisations to keep us safe. I get it. There is a lot of that stuff that we can't control with SaaS. At the end of the day, it's about managing risk. This risk matrix is used in a huge variety of applications outside of the IT world. And it's all about taking a look, what is the likelihood that something is going to happen? And what are the consequences if it does? That gives us our rating, low, moderate, or high. If it's moderate or if it's high and we're not happy about it, what control measures can we put in place? And then we can reevaluate it and see if that risk has come down, okay? So we manage risk every day by the protection measures that we put in place in our systems, and we expect our SaaS providers to do the same. The question is, can the SaaS provider manage risk as well as you can? A lot of IT pros don't think so, because we don't like things that are outside of our control, okay? But they have big budgets, and their reputation depends on it. It's not only your data that they're protecting, it's all of their customers. This is their livelihood. If they stuff this up, they have lost their business. And I don't want you to go on with some blind faith and trust that they do everything perfectly, because we don't do everything perfectly either. And we have problems and challenges in our environments. How are their backups and their restores? What happens if one of your users decides to delete something? Can you easily restore it? Tell you what, granular level restore in SaaS apps is a pain in the neck, depending on what the SaaS application is. And there are a lot of third-party providers that are stepping into the forward backup stuff. I mean, StorageCraft here, for example, have a product that backs up Office 365. Microsoft will tell you that you don't need to, because they have great backups, but they have very particular solution and skill sets that they bring to make granular restores of things like individual emails a lot easier than you can do natively in Office 365. There's two parts to change management. One is yours, the other is theirs. Your part is, do you have your SaaS application as part of your own change management process? Do you need to? Sounds a little bit weird when we think that it's a cloud-based application, we access it via the browser. What the heck are we going to change in our environment that's going to impact that? Well, there could be stuff, depending on what you're changing in your environment. But the trick is that if you don't know about it, if it's not part of your plans, you can't test it, and it might get missed. So make sure that you have visibility of this stuff in your own change management processes. How does the SaaS provider handle change management? They send an email out to your users and they go, we've got this great new feature, you'll have it tomorrow. Yeah, we don't like that so much, do we? You need to make sure that you have communication channels open so that you know what's changing in those SaaS applications. That's going to impact how your business operates or what features your users are going to have access to. SaaS vendors are very good at lighting things up by default, to which we then want to go and turn off because we're not quite ready for them. Okay, so make sure that you are plugged into the support channels, roadmaps, all of that kind of stuff about what they are planning to change in the future and what their release cycles are, because it will hit you whether you like it or not. Configuration management. What restrictions do you have on the configuration of the devices within your organization that might impact a SaaS application? And that could be anything like running older versions of browsers because you have another line of business application that needs it. Restrictions on versions of Java, not installing Flash, all of those kind of bits and pieces that you might have locked down as part of your standard operating environment that might impact how a SaaS application can run. Again, know about it so that you can test for it. Testing and pre-prod. It's not really such thing as testing and pre-prod in a SaaS application. You don't kind of tend to get the ability to run up those sort of things. Best advice I can offer you here is actually look at getting a subscription that you can play with. Get a SaaS subscription with some dummy users and some dummy data so that you can see what happens if you break things or change things. That's as close to testing and pre-prod in the SaaS world as you're going to get. And at the cost of it, it's usually worth it. you'll just stop for a minute and look at this work of art. I love good network cabling. It's beautiful. Now, I'm not a network engineer, but I know that different SaaS applications have different impacts on the network and different tolerance levels. So work with your networking guys. This is going to be dependent on how much data they're putting into SaaS, how much data they're getting out of it, and how regularly they're pulling data out of it. Are we talking video files? Are we talking things like Skype that is very sensitive to latency and packet dropping and those kind of things? So have a look at what those requirements are and how the business is going to be using those SaaS applications and whether or not you might need to take your network into account. Now, I work with the small end of town, the SMBs, the little 10 to 50 staff, and this one with our Australian internet speeds is a killer. I've got customers that can't get ADSL2, let alone NBN, so we have to be really, really careful about what workloads we're putting in the cloud for them. Device security. Is the business going to expect to have access to these SaaS applications from their personal devices? If so, how are you securing them? Can you secure them? Are we looking at something like mobile device management from Microsoft, where you can put the SaaS application inside the corporate section of their phone, so if it gets lost or stolen, you can wipe that app and any data that it's cached? Have a look and see whether or not you've got a requirement to put some additional device security around that SaaS application. The identity stuff, I told you I would get to this one because I think out of everything, this is one of the most important parts that we can protect the business from when it comes to SaaS. That identity and access management, who can get access and what can they get access to. Now, in your own organisation, you have things in place to handle this. You have procedures to reset somebody's password, to change their access if they move teams, to set them up in the systems when they join, and to disable their access when they leave. How are you going to do all of that in a SaaS application? And the thing is that with scale with SaaS apps, when you start talking more than one SaaS application, you'll start to get these little pockets of user accounts and identity in the cloud that are all siloed, which is a nightmare for your data security team to manage. If they have to log in to 5 different systems to create a new user or rename them or disable their access, they are not going to be happy. Do you need to secure the SaaS application with two-factor authentication? Is it important enough to do that? This is your corporate data we're talking about here. Can you do that? Does the SaaS application even support 2FA? Now, 2FA, depending on what organisation you're in, is either a corporate necessity and you do it, or it's a pain in the neck and it's too hard because users, okay? But I tell you what, two-factor authentication is the best thing to put in the way of hackers, because one of the most successful ways that hackers get information is because we give them our login accounts. They're really good at social engineering. They're really good at phishing. They're really good at pretending to be the page that I need to sign into to reset my password or re-verify the thing because I got an email about it. So I'm just going to go and log in and do it because I can't be bothered calling the help desk and sitting on hold for 5 minutes to find out if it was true or not. Bingo. Username and password, access, thank you very much. Okay? Two-factor authentication is your best defense against your users handing over their credentials to people that are phishing because they can't get in without that second factor. Azure Active Directory, if you haven't seen it in action, can actually be the gateway to that access for the SaaS applications. So what I'm going to do here is go into Active Directory and actually grant one of my users access to a SaaS application. There are 2,500 SaaS applications that are supported by Azure Active Directory. A few of them you might know. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and light up Twitter because I have a marketing team and I want them to use my corporate Twitter handle. I'm going to go ahead and publish that and configure it for single sign-on. Now, in this particular setup, I'm going to assign it to the user so that they will see it when they log into Office 365. So I can control who has access to see that icon. I don't want to tell the whole company that they've got access to Twitter. I'll assign it to the user. And I'm going to enter the credentials on behalf of the user. The reason I do this is because that end user will never know the Twitter credentials. They will never see the password. So I'm going to enter in the corporate credentials, and then on the next screen, I'm going to tell it that I want it to facilitate rollover so that when that password changes, because I'm changing my passwords on a regular basis, like a good little secure person, I want that to roll over so it applies to these user accounts as well. There you go, password rollover, we'll set him to 4 weeks. What that means for our end user I think my demo's stopped. Here we go. What it means to my end user is when they log into Office 365, they go to their app launcher and they'll now have a new little icon up in the new box. There you go. Here's Twitter. All they need to do now is click on that button. It'll open up the web browser and sign them into Twitter with a corporate account. And they don't have the password. And they have access to Twitter. Which means if I detect that they're being a little bit grumpy and unhappy with work, I might just decide to revoke that access. Because the last thing I want is for them to go and do a big Twitter rant under my corporate brand because they know what the password is and I haven't had a chance to reset it. Because if I reset it, I've got to tell all the other people that use that corporate account what the new password is. Okay? 2,500 known SaaS applications you can control. And you can actually let the users put in their own usernames and passwords, but this will give you access to control access to those SaaS applications through Azure Active Directory. The other great news for Azure Active Directory is pass-through authentication and seamless single sign-on without the need for ADFS. ADFS is a wonderful thing if you have the money and the technical skills. ADFS requires a minimum of 4 servers, and then the great thing about ADFS is because it is the gateway, but from your identity to the cloud, if it falls over, nobody's getting access to their cloud resources. So your ADFS infrastructure has to have redundancy built in to enable that continuous service. Not every organization has the resources, the money, and the skills to run ADFS. And now Azure AD Connect, that is a connection engine between your on-premises Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, supports pass-through authentication and seamless single sign-on without the need for ADFS. If you want more information on enabling that in your organization, I've thrown up a bit.ly link there to the Azure AD pass-through authentication blog. Feel free to grab a screenshot of that. Azure AD also has built-in automated user provisioning to the following services. You might recognize a few of those SaaS applications. Now, it's only a pretty small list at the moment. I'm hoping it will grow, but there are some very common ones in there that are used with businesses where, as part of creating a user and them syncing to Azure AD, we now have automated user provisioning so that it will spin up accounts for them in those other systems as well. Again, it's about controlling what you can, automating some of this stuff, reducing the amount of manual processes that you have to do across different systems. Azure AD Identity Protection is another great tool for us to protect those identities in the cloud. With AD Identity Protection, we can actually monitor and get alerts when users have leaked credentials. The sign-ins, the impossible travel to atypical locations is one of my favourites. So that's where the system alerts if it sees me log in Sydney, and then 3 minutes later my same account logs in London, which is physically impossible for me to travel to the other side of the world and log in a different geolocation. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that Azure AD Identity Protection will alert on to tell you what's going on with those sign-ons in the cloud. The support stuff. We have SLAs in our organisation about uptime and response times for the systems that we provide to the business. Does your SaaS provider provide an SLA? This is one of the biggest differences between a consumer-grade SaaS app and a business-grade SaaS application, okay? Ask the questions, check out the fine print. What's their availability? What are their response time commitments? And the one that gets me is especially Monday morning Australian time is the weekend in America. So if you have a system that is provided outside of Australia, you want to know that when you ring up on a Monday morning, if you have an issue, you're going to have access to the A team and the fast response that you need. Okay? What are you going to need to do in your organisation in terms of providing support for the SaaS application? Which sounds a little bit weird when I said to you that support is part of the license and you don't need to worry about it. But at the end of the day, the users aren't going to call the SaaS provider when they have a problem. They're going to call your help desk, okay? So make sure that your help desk and your IT pros have access to accounts that they can play with. Identify your product champions and raise them up, and make sure that they know what the procedures are for raising tickets or placing support calls if things aren't working. Monitoring is shifting. As IT pros, we are used to monitoring memory usage, IOPS, what the server's doing, what the network's doing. We don't have any of that in SaaS. SaaS providers do all that for us. But we're still going to want to know how the application is performing, unless you want to wait until you start getting the flood of help desk calls to tell you that the SaaS app is down. So monitoring now shifts to an application-specific basis. What do you need to put in place to monitor the availability of a SaaS application? Business continuity and disaster recovery. Again, from a SaaS provider's perspective, they will have things in place for DR within their own systems. But if their systems are down, your business is going to want to know how they're supposed to carry on without it. When I started in tech, one of my first projects was a big rollout of email to half of a bank branch network across the country. When email went down, we had half of the branches on the phone screaming that they couldn't do their work. And the other half of the branch network were carrying on just fine without it, thank you very much. They didn't have email. They weren't used to the tool. They hadn't adopted it as part of their business processes. Okay? So as soon as you light this up for the business, you need to have the conversation with them about what is plan B for you. If the SaaS provider has an issue, if there's a Telstra network outage that's taken out all the Sydney data centres, how critical is this to the business? What do they need to put in place, and what can they put in place to enable them to still serve the customers without this in place? And it could even be things like social media messages. You know, do the social media team have things in place to be able to advise people that you've got a systems outage somewhere? And last but not least, our people. Get all the stakeholders around the table before you start these SaaS projects. And I'm not just talking the IT departments. It could be the legal and risk teams. It probably is a lot of the business owners. You need to make sure that you're communicating to the right people about these projects and what's going on. IT management. You need to have the back of your IT staff if the SaaS stuff goes down, because they can't control it. and the business needs to be aware of that. The business management needs to be on board about what's realistic with the system and what you can control and what you can't control. And us good old IT professionals. It's a changing landscape. It really is. And a lot of people are concerned about what this means for their job. What does it mean for the future if you're taking systems out of our environment and you're getting them from somebody else in the cloud? Have those conversations with your IT staff. Make sure that they've got access to upskill themselves and they have a little bit of uncertainty about what their future holds. If they've been using and supporting an in-house system for a long, long time, change is scary. So support them. Give them the skills, the resources, and the time to get their head around this new stuff. So I'm going to leave you with a challenge. I truly believe that we need to start doing IT at the speed of business. And I understand the reasons why we think we can't. What I want you to do when you leave this session is to come up with a proof of concept plan. I want you to write down the things that you need to put in place and the conversations that you need to have to enable the business to test and play with some SaaS capabilities and for you to be happy. That might be stuff like already having played with Azure AD so that you've got that identity stuff in place. It might be having a framework in place so that you can set expectations straight up front that this proof of concept plan is dummy accounts, dummy data, it'll run for 3 months and then it'll be deleted, okay? So those kind of frameworks, if we can get it in place, it means that the business can go out there and start experimenting with us knowing that we're not putting a lot of stuff at risk. And if they decide a month down the track that it doesn't live up to the hype and it's not fulfilling their expectations, we haven't wasted a ton of time, okay? I want IT to start being seen as enablers and not just gatekeepers. I think we've got enough people in this room that 20 successful SaaS projects by the next Ignite should be achievable. Now, they haven't set the dates for Ignite 2018, so we might have 12 months, we might have 18 months. We have a bit of leeway here, so this is good. But I'd really like to hear how you get on in the real world. You can tweet me at cuff_s, or you can email me, sonia@themissingchair.com.au. Let me know how you get on, what you've gone back into the office and implemented, or what new tools you've looked at as part of having this conversation. Because me standing up here telling you about it is not what is going to make a difference and change the world. You enabling this successfully and securely for the business is what's going to enable our businesses to go and do great things with the cool technology that they've now got access to. And that's me. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I know that it is very late in the day. Are there any questions? No? Covered perfectly. Yes. Right. Yep. Okay. So the question was about a story where a SaaS provider had an issue where they lost data and they couldn't recover it from a backup. And it's how do you have certainty that what they say they will do in terms of protecting your data. Short answer is you don't have a 100% guarantee. The longer answer is I know a lot of organizations are looking at how they back up SaaS data in a different system or in a different place. So like I said, third-party cloud backup providers that can hook into systems so that they can store a copy of your SaaS data in a completely independent different system, or even sometimes suck it back on premises for you to use. So it does come down to It comes down to, will the world end if you lose that data? And if so, what can you put in place to give you extra protection over and above what the SaaS provider says? And as I said with those horror stories, you hear people with in-house systems that somehow managed to lose stuff like that because they weren't testing their backups or goodness knows what else they weren't doing. I'm always very cautious of hearing those horror stories in the media because I know that we get a version of what happened, and somewhere in the organisation there's the poor IT manager that actually knows the real story about what went on and why it failed. So yeah, the best advice I can offer you is, if it's that important to you, the data, have a look and see how you can either take regular exports of that data back to in-house or use another independent cloud backup provider to back that up. Yeah. Anything else? No? Fantastic. Thank you. Enjoy your evening.